Yeah, I love how he says that at the end. It's complicated. Like they just changed the line in the movie so that all he has to do is say, it's complicated, because he's actually able to say that. Saying, would that it were so simple, is too hard for him. What was the very first thing that God ever made? Wisdom, exactly. The first thing God ever made was wisdom, and that means when God was creating the universe, he created it according to his wisdom. So before he made the laws of physics that said gravity pulls things down, before he made all the laws of physics that we go by every day, the first thing that God made was the moral laws, or the ways to be successful at life. God decided what that was going to be first, and he created the universe in a way that if you follow those guidelines, your life will go a lot better. Your life will be a lot more successful. So when God's giving us advice about how to live, what kind of people to watch out for, what kind of people not to associate with, how to be wise, when God does all that, he's not doing it to make our lives just really strict and have all these rules and ruin our lives. God's doing it because he's trying to show us what is the best way to live. What is the way that will make me live the best life possible? And I was thinking about, for an example, and since I'm a nerd, I'll use a video game example. I had this James Bond game back when I was like your guys' age, like 13. I had this James Bond game, and you could play through the James Bond game, and it was always like, you're in the level, get from point A to point B, and however you get from point A to point B really doesn't matter all that much. You can shoot all the people, you can sneak past the people, you can do it whatever way you want. But if you play a particular way, there's certain things you can do that are called the James Bond moments. And it's where you do something cool, like take a zip line or something like that. And whenever you do one of them, the words 007 will flash across the screen and a little song will play. It'll play a little riff of the song. And whenever you do those moments, the James Bond moments, you get a little bit faster from point A to point B. You get there a little bit quicker, or it looks a little bit cooler. You get some bonus points. It would work like that. It might be like, instead of just shooting these people, maybe you just shoot this explosive barrel right behind them, and they all blow up. And you just get through that section a lot faster. So you can just get from point A to point B just shooting people or sneaking past them, whatever you want to do. But if you play to get the James Bond moments, then it makes it a lot easier, and it makes it look a lot flashier, and it's just a lot more fun that way. And that is really what following the Proverbs is like. Whenever you do those, it's kind of like God's own, these are the God moments. You follow those Proverbs, and it makes life easier. You start at a certain place in life, you end at a certain place in life. There's lots of different ways you can get there. But if you will follow God's advice, it'll be a lot more fun, and it'll be a lot easier. So it's kind of like playing according to the rules. So that's why we're studying wisdom, because the first thing God made was wisdom. It's how he ordered the world. So we want to play by the world's rules, the way that God made it. And that's why it's so helpful to study Proverbs. Here's a recap on Proverbs, because we did this one lesson, I think it's 4 metamorphoses ago. Metamorphoses, whatever, I don't know. 4 of them ago, we talked about the first loser. And that was called, does anybody remember? Nabal. That's a great guess. We did talk about Nabal a couple times ago. There's a different loser before that. The scoffer. Do you guys remember the lesson on the scoffer?
Yeah.
And the scoffer is the one who's kind of like at the beginning of that video. When he starts off, would that it were so simple. The scoffer is the type of person who makes that scoffing sound. And we talked about them for a whole lesson. And we started off, I gave you guys some guidelines for the book of Proverbs. So you don't have to write these down, because I gave them to you before. But I'm just going to recap some of them from when we talked about the scoffer. So like the book of Ecclesiastes, Proverbs was also written by Solomon. A proverb is a short saying that states a general truth or a piece of advice. And so a lot of times whenever you explain what a proverb means, a lot of times you need like a whole paragraph to do it. They're so complex. And the great thing about a proverb is that it's just a really smart idea, and it's condensed down into like one sentence. Proverbs emphasizes wisdom through character, relationships, and words, and also how fools will fail in all these areas. And it tells us what fools look like. and how not to be a fool, but how to be wise instead. So we're going to look at Proverbs from the perspective of 3 types of losers. And remember, even though the Bible uses the word fool a lot of the time to describe all 3 of these type of people, when you look at the original Hebrew, and it's also like this in English too a lot of the time, when you look at it the original way, there's 3 different types of fools that Proverbs tells us about. So the first one we did was the scoffer or the scorner, or that Hebrew word for it was, I think, lutz, something like that. Is that what it was? So we talked about that last time. Today we're going to talk about one called the simple. The simple is the next loser we're going to talk about. So what is the simple? Well, the simple, and make a note of this, they are not evil. They're just ignorant or naive. The simple are not evil. They're just ignorant or naive. Ignorant or naive. Yeah, what'd you call it? Ignorant? Is that because I used to say that?
Yep.
Yeah, when in McDonald County where I grew up, they made ignorant into just 2 syllables. Ignorant. When someone was, they'd say it about someone who was simple. They'd say, he's not a bad guy, he's just ignorant. You just don't know any better. So the simple is a type of fool. They're not an evil person. Because when we talked about the scoffer, they're kind of jerks. We could say they're kind of an evil person because they're really mean. So that's a bad type of fool. Now, you still don't want to be a fool, but the simple is not evil. He's just naive or ignorant. They lack what older people have a lot of the time, which is experience. You need experience to get out of this kind of trap of being the simple. So listen, if you are any type of fool, I would say this is the type to be. Because they're not a very bad person. It's just they're not a very smart person, is a way to put it. If you're simple, and you know that you're simple and you don't care about changing out of that or getting better, well, then that's bad. Then that's kind of getting into evil territory. But normally they're not an evil person. They're just not that bright a lot of the time, or they're just inexperienced. They might be smart, but they just don't know what they're into a lot of the time. So that guy in the video that I showed, I think he gives off you can kind of see, how do I say this? If you actually watch the movie, because I have seen the movie, he's actually not really dumb in the movie. But that guy who's trying to say the twir line in the movie, in the commercial, he doesn't come across as that bright. He kind of comes across as dumb. And I think he could be a good example of the simple. He's not a bad person. He's not mean. He just doesn't know how to say the word twir. He doesn't know how to speak in kind of like that dignified way that the director's trying to get him to speak. And so he'd be kind of an example of the simple. Not a bad dude, just not super intelligent for what he's supposed to do. Really inexperienced. Why don't you guys grab a Bible and turn to Proverbs chapter 1. I was talking about him earlier. He wrote the book of Proverbs. Yeah. So we're going to look at one of the Proverbs of Solomon. Now, at the beginning of the book, it's talking about the importance of wisdom and what wisdom does for us. And so look at chapter 1, verse 4. This is something that wisdom does for us. Wisdom is here to give prudence to the simple, to the young man knowledge and discretion. Wisdom is to give prudence to the simple, to the young man knowledge and discretion. So if someone has the problem of they are one of the simple, they're inexperienced, the book of Proverbs will help give them prudence. I'll give that definition in a second. But first, here's the Hebrew word for the simple. I want you guys to write it down. And I've never seen a word before that has an at symbol in the word. And I thought my computer was glitching or something, but this is just the way it rendered it, so you can write it down that way. It's pronounced pithy. That's the Hebrew word for the simple, pithy. But you can just write it that way. I don't care how you want to say it. It's fine. It's just the factoid I want you to have, but it's not going to be super important. It's better to just know what the simple is. The Hebrew word for it, though, is pithy. So wisdom will give the young man prudence, knowledge, and discretion. And I didn't actually know what prudence really meant, so I looked it up, because that word's going to come up a lot in today's lesson. Prudence, write this down, prudence means exercising cautiousness and good judgment. So basically it means learning how to be careful and to make informed decisions. Prudence. You keep writing there. Why don't you turn to your Bibles to Proverbs chapter 7. Proverbs 7, it tells a little story about the simple. And this story is really a great message for men. It's more directed toward men. But I want us all to read it here. It's in Proverbs chapter 7, starting at verse 4. And this is a message. I think it'll give a good idea of what the simple is. The purpose of this message is to warn inexperienced young guys about women who will try to sleep with them. That's basically what it's about. It's giving advice to them. But I think this is some good stuff to go over. I say but because I know this is not something you guys probably want to talk about. But this is what the Bible is saying to young men. Proverbs chapter 7, verse 4. It says, "Say to wisdom, you are my sister, and call understanding to your nearest kin, that they may keep you from the immoral woman, from the seductress who flatters with her words. For at the window of my house I looked through my lattice, and I saw among the simple, I perceived among the youths, a young man devoid of understanding." In an NIV Bible, it said, he had no sense. It said, "Passing along the street near her corner, and he took the path to her house. In the twilight, in the evening, in the black and dark night, and there a woman met him with the attire of a harlot and a crafty heart." And so the idea of this little story right there, the idea is that he's meeting up with a girl he doesn't really understand, or he doesn't realize the kind of thoughts that she's having. And so she's tempting him. She's tempting him is what the problem is right here. This part of the Bible is warning men about women who try to sleep with them. Obviously, there are women who need to watch out for men who just try to sleep with them too.
That's why you wait till you get married.
And that's why, you wait till you get married.
Unless you want.
This can go both ways. It's just that this particular story is warning men right here. So I'm just going off of that. It's not something anti-women. It happens both ways, and we all are aware of that. Okay, but to get back into this, the idea is that this guy's meeting up with the girl, and he doesn't realize what kind of thoughts she's having, but he should, because there's warning signs all over the place. Okay, one of the warning signs right there are flattering words. It says she comes after him with flattering words, and men love to be told nice things about themselves. That is a weakness for men. I'm saying this to the guys especially. You want to watch out for when people come up to you and they just are constantly flattering you, because men really will eat that up a lot of the time. I think when a girl has someone come up to them and just keeps telling them nice thing and nice thing and nice thing, they get a little bit more suspicious of that. Yeah, they can kind of see through that a little bit better. But men are not as bright in that area a lot of the time. So they need to keep an eye out for that kind of thing when a girl just comes up and just has a lot of flattering words, is really just the best way to put it. Men will just eat that up, and it'll get them into trouble. Another thing is that it says she came with the attire of a harlot. And different translations will put that in different ways. That she came, I guess we're all using the same one, so we can't check it. But you know what? Whatever translation you're going with, we can figure out what the attire of a harlot is. It probably means that she's showing a lot of skin. That's probably basically what it means, that she's showing a lot of skin. And a way you could put it is that she's scantily clad. You want to be careful, really, you want to be careful what kind of message it sends whenever you're showing a lot of skin. When a woman dresses like that, that is showing sexual aggression towards guys. That's kind of what that is showing. Whenever a woman is dressing, showing a lot of skin, her body is saying, "Look at me, pay attention to me." And guys can get really intimidated by that kind of aggression, those kind of vibes that a woman is throwing off, because they might not necessarily be attracted to that kind of woman, but it messes with guys' heads, and so they have to keep their head above the clouds. It also said that this woman had a crafty heart. And we know that. We can tell that based on the description of how she's acting. We can see that she's trying to use her words and use her body to get what she wants. The problem for guys is that they don't recognize those signposts a lot of the times. We can't see someone's heart, but when they have the attire of a harlot or are using a bunch of flattering words, that should be warning signs for a guy, because they can get taken advantage of by that, but they need to be paying attention. And so that's a great lesson for guys on what to do, what to kind of see through what someone's intentions are when they come at you with a lot of flattering words, or the harlot. The attire of a harlot is how the Bible put it, showing a lot of skin. Watch out for somebody like that. And to the girls also, it's a great lesson about dressing modestly. The man is supposed to be able to tell what kind of woman she is by the way she was dressed. And so it's a really good lesson also about just dressing modestly. And like I said before, women are not always the villain. Like, men can have impure thoughts and motivations as well. And what is important to remember is anytime someone tries to sleep with you before you're married, they are not respecting you whenever they do that. That's not respecting someone. So don't be taken advantage of by thinking things like that. An older man could see a girl like what we were reading about in the story. An older man could see that, and he would maybe say, oh, she's trying to flirt with him. She's trying to get with that guy. An older man can see through a lot of those things because he has experience. But the younger man, more wisdom, right? But the younger man, he might be more simple. So he's not going to pick up on those signs right away. He doesn't have that experience. So that's a really good difference in what is the simple versus who is wise. Who is simple versus who is wise. And anytime someone's trying to use their body to try to get you to go out with them, for you guys, that means you have to be instantly like, no, thank you. You are not material for me. Go back to Proverbs chapter 1. I know I had you flip over to 7, but turn back to chapter 1. And I want to give you a few different attributes of the simple. You guys remember last time we did attributes of the scorner? I'm going to give you guys some attributes of the simple. So go back to Proverbs chapter 1. You guys all there? Okay, you're all there. Look at verse 22. Yes. Yeah, we're all using New King James so that we're all reading the same words, just to keep it simpler. What did it for so simple?
I thought we were talking about not being simple.
Emily, I would give you a pun point if this was Sunday school. You know what else will get you a point? Flattering words for the teacher. Okay, so Proverbs chapter 1, verse 22. It says, how long, you simple ones, will you love simplicity? The scorners delight in their scorning, and fools hate knowledge. The first note I want you to have, the first attribute there of the simple. The simple love simplicity. The simple love simplicity. It says, scorners delight in their scorning, fools love being fools, and the simple love simplicity. The simple love being simple. I was telling Emily a story the other day, and I started off with, hey, Emily, remember that time we were being dumb? And she's like, yeah, she's like, Luke, is that supposed to narrow it down at all? No. The simple love simplicity. And this is the trap for the simple, is that they sometimes they like how they are and they don't want to grow. And that means that they always want things to be easy for them. If you read at a 4th grade reading level and all you ever do is read books that are at a 4th grade reading level, you never try a 5th grade reading level or a 6th grade, you just always read 4th grade, is your reading level ever going to get higher? You know what? You're not going to grow that way because you're not expanding into something beyond what you can do. If you read at a higher level, you'll learn to have a higher reading level for yourself. So you've got to expand. You have to be willing to grow. And the simple don't want to do that. They just love being simple. They would just stick with their picture books all day. Okay, number 2. Turn to Proverbs 14. Are y'all at Proverbs 14? Okay, go down to verse 15 in that. The simple believes every word, but the prudent considers well his steps. The simple believes every word. What do we call that?
Wait.
The simple believes every word. Gullible. No, she had it. Gullible. The simple are gullible. Actually, I put the peanuts one up for Emily. Charlie Brown's always kicking the football, and Lucy always pulls it away before he gets there. So he's gullible. Yeah, you probably heard before that the word gullible is not in the dictionary. But I actually didn't realize till I was doing this lesson, when you say the word gullible really slowly, it sounds like oranges.
Gullible.
Now, I do have a great story about gullibility, and I won't say who the name of this person is because they used to be in the youth group. This was back when Grant was the youth pastor, and we went on a camping trip. So some of you may have heard this story before. We went on a camping trip, and we went up on a Friday. It was on my parents' farm. So we got up Saturday morning. See, Friday night they had been catching a bunch of fish. But Saturday morning, there was like, they weren't catching anything, and it's just because the water was cold and fish don't move around as much early in the morning when the water's cooler. But anyway, they were casting, and they weren't catching anything. So one of the boys comes over to me and says, well, Luke, they were biting a lot last night, but they're not doing anything this morning. And I said, well, yeah, that's because it's a Saturday morning. The fish do like to sleep in on Saturdays, And he's like, really? I didn't know the fish knew what day of the week it was. And he just goes on along with his fishing. And I'm like, wow, I can't believe I was just being sarcastic. But yeah, he like went over to another kid. And I just hear like 5 minutes later, one kid yells, Damien, is he still in high school?
No.
Oh, he graduated. I hear Damien yell like down the creek. I hear him just yell, fish don't know what day of the week it is. But, simple people are really gullible. It says they believe every word. And, you might say, well, what's wrong with trusting people? Trusting people is a good thing. So what's wrong with trusting people? The wise person knows who to trust. The wise person knows how to figure out what person is trustworthy and what kind of person not to trust. And you can even apply that in church. Because like I've said before, don't believe everything just because you hear it in church. Don't believe everything I tell you.
Really?
Yeah. Always check out what you hear in the Bible. Always make sure that the Bible backs up what the person is saying. Because if I say something and the Bible disagrees with it, you should do what the Bible says and not me. Acts 17:11. I had you guys write that down in your notes back whenever we were doing the Jude lesson. Because Jude was a weird book. It had a lot of weird stuff in it. Acts 17:11 says that the Bereans were more noble because everything that Paul told them, they didn't just believe Paul. They went and checked it out in the Bible to make sure Paul was telling them the truth. And it says they were noble because they did that. So there's nothing wrong. It doesn't mean, hey, you should have just trusted Paul. Whatever Paul said, you should have just taken his word for it. It didn't say that. It says they were noble because they checked out everything he said in the Bible. Now, when I was teaching Jude, there's some weird stuff in there. I didn't want you guys to think I had just gone off on the crazy train. So I said, check everything I'm saying to you by the Bible. Don't just write me off and say Luke's crazy. Check to see if what I'm telling you is true. And don't just believe it because I said it. But always check. And do that with anybody in church. If a good pastor should not care if you do that. A good pastor should want you guys to do that. So if you're questioning something, check it out by the Bible. Turn to verse 18. It's just a few after the one that we just read. Still in chapter 14. Look at verse 18. It says, the simple inherit folly, but the prudent are crowned with knowledge. Do you guys remember what folly is?
No.
We talked about that one time.
Molly.
Charlene's got it. Yes. Senselessness, immorality, or disgrace. Charlene has got the definition down. So it is immoral to engage in folly. Remember how I said earlier that the simple is not necessarily bad. They just don't have experience. Now, if you just want to remain simple just because you like being simple and stuff like that, then that is folly. It says the simple will inherit folly then. They weren't going to grow. So then that is a bad thing. And the way to avoid that, the Bible says, give thought to your steps. Be a thoughtful person. Think about the outcome of where your steps are going to lead you. Think about the outcome of your decisions. Let me put it in regard to our words for a minute. Well, when I think about a simple person, I think about someone who probably says a lot of dumb things. They probably say stuff and they regret it later, or they don't realize what they said. Some of us are pointing at ourselves. Yeah, I would point at myself. I do that sometimes. I'm not trying to, or pointing at Emily. Or who are you pointing at, yourself or Emily? Okay. Well, you know what? We all say dumb things. And I'm not saying I'm one of the simple. I do say dumb things sometimes.
No, you don't.
Oh, thank you, Newt. But you know what? When I think of the simple, I think of a person who will just blurt out whatever pops into his head. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, sir. So I'm going to show a video clip. It's about 2 minutes long of the debates this past week.
Yes.
And I'm doing it to give an example. And I don't want to go off on a whole political tangent, so let's not get off into all that. I want to give an example here of whenever someone just says whatever pops into their mouth, then how that can reflect poorly on them. Whatever pops into their head, it just comes blurting out of their mouth. It can have bad consequences. So I want to show a short clip. It's 2 minutes long. It's a clip of Donald Trump talking about, I'll just let you guys hear it for yourselves.
But this is a man who has called women pigs, slobs, and dogs, and someone who has said pregnancy is an inconvenience to employers, who has said women don't deserve equal pay unless they do as good a job as men. And one of the worst things he said was about a woman in a beauty contest. He loves beauty contests, supporting them and hanging around them. And he called this woman Miss Piggy. Then he called her Miss Housekeeping because she was Latina. Donald, she has a name.
Where did you find
her
this?
name
Where
is
did you find
Alicia
this?
Machado.
Where did you find
and
it?
she has become a U.S. citizen, and you can bet she's going to vote this November.
Okay, good. Let me just tell you.
Mr. Trump, can we just take 10 seconds, and then we're going to have the final question.
Hillary is hitting me with tremendous commercials. Some of it said in entertainment. Some of it said somebody who's been very vicious to me, Rosie O'Donnell. I said very tough things to her, and I think everybody would agree that she deserves it, and nobody feels sorry for her.
My reference was to what you had said in 2002, and my question was, why is your judgment any different than Mrs. Clinton?
Well, I have much better judgment than she does. There's no question about that. I also have a much better temperament than she has. You know, I have a much better. She spent, let me tell you, she spent hundreds of millions of dollars on an advertising. You know, they get Madison Avenue into a room, they put names. Oh, temperament, let's go after. I think my strongest asset, maybe by far, is my temperament. I have a winning temperament. I know how to win. She does not know how to win.
Clinton?
Wait, the AFL-CIO the other day, behind the blue screen, I don't know who you were talking to, Secretary Clinton, but you were totally out of control. I said, there's a person with a temperament that's got
Let's try to we'll wrap this up here, I think, in pretty quickly. The stuff that Donald Trump said at the debate has followed him around all week. And what they were nailing on him was stuff that he said like 20 years ago. They were bringing up words that he said 20 years ago. And instead of like just saying, oh, I shouldn't have said those things, you know, instead of just doing that, he decided to defend it, and he just made the whole situation worse for himself. If he just said, oh yeah, I shouldn't have said those things 20 years ago, well, nobody would have cared then. They wouldn't have had anything to hold over him anymore, and they could have just moved on to another issue. But instead, he kept talking about this one thing. I just showed that clip to make a really big point here. We have to be careful with our words. The simple person might just open their mouth and just blurt something dumb out. You want to be careful with your words. So see it like, and I'm using this as an example because it's current events, not because I'm trying to pick on a candidate or anything like that. It's a great example about the importance of our words, though. At the beginning of the week, he was tied with Clinton in the polls, and he had like a 45 or 50% chance of winning the election. They were tied in the polls. They said he has a 45% likelihood to win. And this past week after the debate, he's dropped to 35%, which makes it like really, really hard for him to get that momentum back and build his way back up. He was at the highest, a week ago, he was at the highest he'd ever been. And then today, it's like dropped 10 or 15%.
So now she's winning?
So she's winning by a lot now. And I remember 2 or 3 months back, maybe 3 or 4 months ago, Michael Brown, he's a writer for Charisma News, he wrote a great opinion piece he wrote it like an open letter to Donald Trump. And he said, here's some verses from Proverbs about the use of our words. He says, if you will follow these biblical principles, you will without a doubt win the election. If you will just follow these verses about how to use your words carefully. If you'll just do that, he said, without a doubt, you will totally win this election because there's so many people who don't like Hillary Clinton. It would be so easy for you to get their votes if you just show yourself as a stable person who chooses his words carefully. I'm sure Donald Trump never read that column, but you know what? This is such great advice, especially if you're running for president someday, Newt. This is great advice for using your words. Well, I think you have some great ideas. Your country. Now, let me give you an example from another president, Calvin Coolidge. Calvin Coolidge was the 29th president of the United States. He was president from 1923 to 1929, and he was known as Silent Cal. This was a guy who did not talk a lot, Silent Cal. And one time somebody went to him and they said, President Coolidge, why are you so quiet all the time? Why don't you ever talk? And this is what he said. I have never regretted anything I didn't say. Yeah, great words right there, right? He says, I've never regretted anything I didn't say. So whenever you choose your words carefully, choose your words, consider your steps. Whenever you do that, you'll never regret the things you didn't say. And you will hardly ever regret the things that you do say, because you'll use better words. Consider your steps. Okay, turn to Proverbs 19. I think we got like 2 more verses to look at. And then I will give you the cure for the simple.
Done.
Proverbs 19, verse 25. It says, strike a scoffer, and the simple will become wary. Rebuke one who has understanding, and he will discern knowledge. This is a little bit tricky one to understand, but it's saying whenever you see someone else getting in trouble for something, you should try to learn from their mistake and try not to make the same mistake that they've made. Try to use that as a lesson for yourself. And it's like whenever you see someone pulled over on the side of the road by a police officer and their lights are on and stuff, whenever you see that, don't you want to kind of slow down a little bit as you're going by them? Just to probably a little bit less than what the speed limit is.
I do that anyways.
Yeah, anytime you see a cop, you probably do that. But when you see someone getting pulled over and you're like, well, man, they might be getting a speeding ticket or anything. Every time you see that, you glance down at your own speedometer to make sure that you're not speeding, because you don't want the same thing to happen to you. So we do that too. I used this as an example in the sermon I did last Sunday, so you might have heard me say this. But, when I stuck my hand with that knife a few weeks back, it was maybe a month ago now, and I'm still talking about it. And I still got the boo-boo right here. But whenever I did that, when I talk about it, I always say, I was being dumb in the kitchen. When someone see the big bandage, they'd be like, what happened? I was not being smart with the knife. I would just say that to kind of imply, don't do the same thing I did. Don't be dumb with knives in the kitchen. I mainly did that with teenagers, or if a teenager was around. I would say that so that they could learn from my mistake and that they wouldn't do the same dumb thing that I did by trying to open something with a knife that I shouldn't have been doing.
Oh, I thought, never mind.
The first question that one of the kids asked me was, did you do that on purpose? No, they said, were you trying to kill yourself? I'm like, yeah. Trying to commit suicide that way. So it says the simple will become wary. And wary, that means that they beware of it. And that's a good thing. It doesn't mean, oh, those darn simple people, they're just now getting it. Good grief. That's not what that means. It means, hey, they're learning. That's a great thing. They're actually learning from someone else's mistake. So, and that's what they need to learn from things like that. So what if you're not the one who saw someone getting pulled over? What if you are the one getting pulled over? That's a great question to ask. It says, rebuke one who has understanding, and he will discern knowledge. So if you're the one who gets pulled over, it says if you're a wise person, you will learn from that. You'll learn from it. You won't, I can't think of many people who've ever gotten a speeding ticket that would actually say, yeah, you know what, I deserved that ticket. The cop was right to give me that ticket. People almost never say something like that. They always have a billion excuses. Well, that cop was just following me around. He had it out for me. Or someone else was going faster than me and he didn't pull them over. Or, they always have some reason that they didn't deserve the speeding ticket that they got. People will always have a million reasons. They think someone was out to get them or something like that. Or, they just say, hey, he should have let me off with a warning. You hear people say that a lot too. But that's not being a wise person. A wise person will learn from their mistakes. Were you speeding? Did you run a stop sign? Yeah, I did do that. Maybe they should have let you off with a warning, but they had a right to give you a ticket. So, you just accept it and you learn from it. You accept the consequences and you learn from them. And that's what makes you a wise person. Doesn't mean you're a failure or a fool because you got a speeding ticket. If you learn from it, then that makes you a wise person. Turn to Proverbs 22, verse 3. It says, a prudent man foresees evil and hides himself, but the simple pass on and are punished. A thing about the simple is that he does not take danger or risks very seriously. And so here's one more attribute of the simple. The simple fool, yes, write this one down. The simple fool thinks bad things won't happen to him. So, what if you hear about someone doing something stupid and you think, well, if I tried that'd never happen to me. The odds of that happening are crazy. There's nothing wrong if I try to do that same thing. Well, the Bible says when you do that that's whenever you'll inherit folly. Because the fool thinks that just bad things are not going to happen to him. Statistically speaking, most of the bad things you hear about happening to other people will never happen to you. Statistically speaking, some of them will. So we got to watch out for them. We got to be prudent. If you're going to be a prudent person, that means you give as few openings for tragedy as you can. That's why I had you guys write down the definition of prudent at the beginning, because the prudent is the opposite of the simple in so many of these. So you can't always avoid tragedies 100%, but you can cut down on a lot of the possibilities of them happening if you will be a prudent person. Okay, so those are 3 attributes of the simple. Now let me give you the cure, and I believe this is the last note that we have. What is the cure for the simple? What can they do about it? The scoffer did not have such a great diagnosis. The scoffer said you just got to cast him out. There's no cure for a scoffer, except for maybe casting him out. But the cure for the simple is experience. The cure for the simple is experience. That means they've just got to learn. So, I mean, that's either really good news or it's really bad news, I guess, depending on how you look at it. On one hand, it's a pretty doable cure. You could say this is really good news because anybody can do this. Anybody can learn. So it's a pretty doable cure. But on the other hand, sometimes the way you learn is the hard way, right? Sometimes you learn a lesson the hard way. And so then it's not so fun. But at least you do still learn. So there's different ways someone can learn. There's different ways someone can gain experience and become not so simple. Learning from your own mistakes, that would be the hard way, when you have to learn from your own mistakes. But the easy way, that could be learning from someone else's mistakes. It could be learning from someone else's mistakes. That would be the easy way to learn. That's the best way to learn, really. And you know, whenever you have an older brother or an older sister, you have a real advantage here, because you can look at your older brother or your older sister and learn from their mistakes. So you have a great advantage there. Parents will say a lot of times that their first child was the mistake child, the one they made all the boo-boos with. So being prudent means that you can become less simple by considering your steps. You don't have to write this down, but remember this. Whoever hates correction is stupid. I just love how the verse puts that so simple. The way that you can become less simple is by considering your steps. Would that you weren't so simple.